Imagine not being able to read the paper because your hands were shaking. Imagine not being able to read newsprint as your world faded to black. The National Federation of the Blind, Newsline, Indiana. With your host, Lee Martin, and co-host, Florence Myers-McSwine.
We want to welcome you to the National Federation of the Blind Newsline show. And first of all, we want to say Happy New Year to everyone. This is our first show of 2020. And as being a visually impaired and blind incentive type show, we want to let everyone know that this year, 2020, we as blind and visually impaired citizens won't have to worry about too much because, Florence?
Yes, Lee.
We will all have 2020. So that's the corn to that joke today. So, Florence, we just want to thank our guest and for joining us once again. And hopefully this new year you'll get us just as much information and education from our show and awareness as you did the previous years. And it has been some great previous years. And come March, believe it or not, it'll be our third year of having this show, bringing it to our public for education and awareness. And we just want to thank you for those of you that continue to watch the NFB Newsline, and those of you that have called in, and those of you that have signed up for the services. And Florence, you want to talk a little bit about the services for those of us, those individuals that have maybe never seen our show?
Surely. Well, NFB Newsline is a free audio information service for the blind and visually impaired. It gives us access to newspapers, magazines, TV guide listings, Walmart, Target circulars. We access that service through a variety of ways. We use our iPhone, computers, Victor Reader Stream, Alexa, and digital player from the Talking Book and Braille Library. There's a lot of information, and that information is free.
And once again, some of the magazines that are, well, I really like reading our Indianapolis Business Journal. Mm-hmm. And then for the first time, you have a publication where we can access the Indianapolis Recorder. I really like being able to access that particular publication. And then, I don't know, I like my sports. So until my team loses, and then I don't follow them anymore. And our guest might have something to say about that, about my mental state on that. So, but there's so much to learn and so much to do. And if you follow our commercials, for those of you that can view the screen, the information is there for you. And those of us that cannot see the screen, it'll be spoken out verbally to you. So join us as we come back for our guest. I'm sure that you don't want to miss our guest today as we talk about mental health.
I'm Danny Wayne Beamer, Program Manager of the Elder Blind Program at the Will Center in Terre Haute, Indiana. I introduce the NFB Newsline to seniors in 13 southwestern counties in Indiana. I also utilize the NFB Newsline for my radio station public affairs shows. The NFB Newsline. Experience it today.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
We are the nation's blind, and we read NFB Newsline.
If you or someone you know is visually impaired or print challenged, the National Federation of the Blind has a resource you need.
I use NFB Newsline when reading Hammond Northwest Times.
Using NFB Newsline, I read the Christian Science magazine. Dad, you're originally filling post too.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
Live the life you want. Read NFB Newsline.
It's free.
Welcome to this week's National Federation of the Blind Newsline Indiana show. It is our privilege today to introduce our special guest, Dr. Shelby Haywood Kegler, PhD, who is a clinical psychologist with Midwest Psychological Center here in Indianapolis. And Dr. Kegler, welcome to our show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And first of all, Dr. Kegler, what exactly is a clinical psychologist?
Well, a clinical psychologist is a specialty in psychology that works directly with clients. It's a PhD degree or PsyD at the doctorate level, highest level of training, to work with those who have mental health problems. We do assessments, work in different entities around, it can be companies, hospitals, or just office practices. But psychologists study human behavior. That's primarily what we do.
Okay, all right. And the Midwest Psychological Center, can you tell me a little bit about your interaction with that? Are you the founder of Midwest?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And tell me a little bit about you, Dr. Kegler,
Well,
if you don't mind.
I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree from Arkansas State University. I got my PhD at Indiana University in Bloomington in psychology. I'm a former athlete. I went to college and played basketball. That's how I paid for my college education. I grew up in a small town in southern Illinois, and I started practicing, working in the field of mental health in Arkansas, doing internships, and I worked 10 years in Terre Haute, and then was blessed to move to Indianapolis and started Midwest Psychological Center, and we've been blessed to grow it from myself to a company.
So how many individuals are employed there?
Well, in total, we have several segments. In our main office, we have approximately 12. We have total nationwide are probably 100 plus employees.
Okay, as we try to get to know you a little bit better on the show, you were born in where?
I was born in Mississippi,
Okay.
and grew up. I was there for first 7 years of my life, and then I came to Illinois, where my mother relocated.
Okay. Now, what inspired you to go into this particular profession?
I think I minored in sociology, and I came in contact with professors who were psychologists, and I was drafted into the military, and that's where I got my start in the mental health field. I was trained in the military as a clinical psychology specialist and worked under psychologists in the military, and that is where I decided that I would go back and become a psychologist myself after working under psychologists and psychiatrists in the military.
Okay, well, what branch?
I was in the Army.
Oh, okay, well, thank you once again for your service. I'm a military veteran as well, Army.
Oh, okay.
And, thank you for your service to
Same
that.
to you.
So, so you got into the military after college.
It was actually, I was drafted out of college.
Okay, drafted, okay.
Yes.
Were you drafted in there as a regular Army, or was you drafted into as an officer?
Regular Army.
Regular Army,
Yes.
okay. So, this field of mental health, let's look into it as ethnicity, as people of color.
Yes.
Do you find that we have more of a hesitancy to seek those services?
Yes, that's been, throughout the years, that's been a barrier to providing services in the minority community, and it's been an issue for years, and it continues to be an issue. It's not just that the services are not, they are accessible, but minorities tend to, and in general, there's a stigma about mental health services, especially in the minority community.
And Dr. Kegler, Dr. McGrath, if I will, can you tell us, because I would definitely like to know, and I'm sure our audience would like to know as well, what is the difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist?
Okay. Well, psychiatrists are medical doctors, and they prescribe medication. That's the main distinction. We are not medical doctors. We are PhDs, and we're kind of known for assessments and testing, which they do not do, and they prescribe medication, which we do not do.
Okay.
But we are the ones that primarily study human behavior that their medication is supposed to alter. And so a lot of the instructions in medical school are provided by psychologists in terms of studying human behavior. But the major difference is they prescribe medication and we do not.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah. Now also, now as far as your interaction, have you had much interaction with people that are blind and visually impaired?
Professionally, I haven't, but personally, when I was a teenager, I grew up in a small town and became very good friends with a blind man called Mr. Joe. And I used to, he lived about a block from my home, and I used to go by and talk and spend a lot of time with him over the years. And he was one of my biggest supporters when I was playing ball in high school, and I used to go by and see him. Actually, he taught me a trick that I used on some seeing folks, and years later, even today, that no one can guess what it is. And he taught me a trick that I use often now, but had fond memories of Mr. Joe. He just seems, he could tell I was coming. It's like when I come around the corner, he would say, "Hey, Haywood, is that you?" And I had a good feel. So that's my main experience growing up around him.
Okay. And Dr. Kegler, I have another question I'd like to ask. You're the best person for this question.
Okay.
What is psychotherapy?
Psychotherapy is basically seeing an individual to help them improve whatever situation that they're in by changing their thoughts and their behavior.
Okay, okay.
For their betterment, to be better than what they are at the present time.
Okay, all right.
So what is the typical client that you have, typically what type of individuals normally come into your office?
Well, over the years, I've worked in a variety of areas that I specialize in. Initially, I've worked in the addiction field. I'm certified in addictions by APA, so that's one of my specialties. I've worked with those with alcohol and drug problems for a number of years. We still have a certified alcohol and drug program in our company, but other staff work directly. But I did work in that population in the beginning. I've also worked as a neuropsychologist on the neuropsychology unit. That's one of my other specialties. That's what I trained for in the military, and I continued that afterwards. So I've worked with clients who've had traumatic injuries of any kind. That's what neuropsychology, and you assess their neuropsychological function in the brain and how it has impacted them. That's one of the areas. I've also worked with children and families. I've consulted Head Start, and we work with Job Corps centers, school systems. So I work with children and families who are having problems also. So it's been a variety. As a company, we do a lot of work with the Department of Child Services, children who have been abused and neglected. Our staff work with those. We work with addiction, the opiate addiction. We have a program for that. So it's a variety of programs. We also do a lot of work. I'm a diplomat in forensic psychology, so I do a lot of assessments for judges around Indiana, those who have insanity or incompetency defenses, and also we do I do work on those who are in facing death sentences. And so I do a lot of work in the forensic system also.
Well, we're going to take a short pause and come back and learn more about mental health and some of the services that are provided. So stay tuned.
Thousands of Indiana residents feel isolated from the world due to vision problems. Thanks to the National Federation of the Blind, visually impaired Hoosiers can hear newspapers, circulars, and magazines from across the globe.
I'm a Vietnam veteran. I'm blind. I read Stars and Stripes on NFB Newsline.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
Subscribe free to NFB Newsline.
We are the nation's blind, and we read NFB Newsline.
As I travel the nation, I read NFB Newsline.
I live in Valparaiso, Indiana, and I listen to my local news on NFB Newsline.
As a student, I enjoy reading current events on NFB Newsline.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
Subscribe free to NFB Newsline today.
Welcome to this segment of the National Federation of the Blind Newsline Indiana. We are speaking with our guest, Dr. Kegler, who is a clinical psychologist. And Dr. Kegler, it's concerning adolescence. Can you tell me what you believe contributes to adolescent suicide?
Well, I think the increase that we're seeing, a lot of it is the isolation and the social media that has caused so many of them to be more isolated and bullied through social media. So that's one area that we see is causing an increase with the adolescent population.
So you tend to see a lot of adolescents at your center?
Well, we consult to agencies where they deal with adolescents, like Job Corps centers. We are the mental health consultants, have done that for a number of years, but we see quite a few of them through the juvenile court system, through DCS. We've had contracts working directly with juvenile population, but throughout the state, and we do work, we have staff in Fort Wayne as well. In the adolescent population, when we hear about some of the suicides, a lot of it has to do with bullying. And that comes also from the isolation of social media, that, now the adolescent population can just be to themselves and isolated in a room at home or wherever. And so a lot of that contributes to them feeling closed in and having not the options in the past. And I think that entails what happens with the increase in suicides.
Okay. Now, suicide is a deep, dark subject. A lot of times we don't talk about the threats of suicide, especially concerning adolescents.
Yeah.
Now, where would there be a place that a person can contact if they needed emergency assistance, as far as someone seeking mental assistance?
Yes.
If I'm making sense?
Yes, yes, you are. Well, most of our school systems have a mandate to have suicide prevention training with all the teachers in the school system throughout the state of Indiana. So if a child could go to someone at school, but if not, you have the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill has a line that you can call any time of the day and speak to someone about receiving services, or they have a crisis hotline that you can call, National Alliance for the Mentally Ill. You also have Mental Health America. They have a hotline also. So you could call those hotlines and get services anytime that you are not at school or somewhere else.
Now, off the air, we were speaking in general about individuals that are coping with blindness. Yes. And if you have an individual that comes into your office as coping with blindness or any traumatic issue, do you see any variances in those two as a comparison with a person that's blind versus a person that's maybe sighted?
The emotional would be pretty much the same. It would kind of depend if the person something has changed where it's a traumatic event that caused their blindness or aging versus having been visually impaired for some time. So if it's a person who something has occurred in their life, then you're talking about dealing with a traumatic event just like you would anything else, a life-changing event in that person's life. And that happens a lot in the elderly as we get older. You have more depression with the elderly population. So it's at that point, it would not be any different than dealing with a traumatic event, a life-changing event to the seeing person. It would be the same.
You know, I kind of lean to that, as you mentioned, about the elderly. And as the baby boom generation, becomes, we're still the largest population of individuals. And we're coping a lot with sight loss or through diabetes, macular degeneration, and glaucoma. Individuals that are, seniors now, as they come to that stage of life, because often as young people, we would hear individuals say, well, I need my glasses, my sight is failing, know, and as you get older, but they never really understood, I guess the psychological, disadvantages toward blindness, because individuals sometimes think that blindness is one of the worst physical things that could happen to you. I've heard people say, well, I'd rather die than to lose my sight, And if people actually believe that, your job is really massive.
Well, at that point, it's helping the person deal with the change and the life change as you would anyone else of the trauma of losing that, and how do you deal with that? And the first thing you're usually going to see is an onset of depression or mood changes in that person, and finding another purpose or for themselves on a daily basis, a purpose for their life, so that they see that life doesn't end with the trauma that's happened. That's what the counselor, the therapist's primary job is to help that person understand your life is not over with that trauma. You adjust to it and move on, and you still have a lot of life to live on a daily basis.
Now, with, say, like caretakers or family members of individuals that are facing, you have a family member that's coping with depression, and do you oftentimes find yourself treating the family member or the caretaker?
Well, I don't know if it's treating them, but you have to involve them in that person's care, and they're the person who's going to be with them the most. And part of the challenge a lot of time is getting the medication compliance or getting them to comply with what therapy has been suggested for them. So a family member is the best person who's with them more than you are to help you and assist you. So it's basically treating them and the whole family at that point.
And Dr. Kegler, how do we get past that stigma that we seem to have about mental health, mental illness, not going to speak to a counselor, not looking at us as really having issues? How do we get past that? You have any idea?
Believe it or not, that's a regionalized problem in America. In the Midwest, you have more stigma, but if you get to either coast, it's less stigma, because in some segments of our society, having a therapist and seeing someone is prestigious. People talk about it openly. My therapist said this, I have a therapist. But studies have shown that in the more conservative parts of the country, like the Midwest or some of the Mid-South, that's where the stigma is the greatest. It's basically educating the person and having them see that to share your problem and get over your problem with someone in confidentiality is not a weakness. And that's what it kind of comes down to, a person feeling that it's a weakness to have to seek help. And so if you can get them to see that you need help in a lot of other areas, so seeking help in this area is no different than going to a doctor and being put on a regimen for your diabetes. It's no different. And that's where it comes down to, feeling that it's not necessarily a weakness to seek help.
Well, that's very interesting information. And I tell you, we're going to take us a short pause, and we're going to come back with the conclusion of our show. And stay tuned.
The National Federation of the Blind knows that blindness is not the characteristic that defines you or your future. Every day we raise the expectations of blind people because low expectations create obstacles between blind people and our dreams. You can live the life you want. Blindness is not what holds you back.
Welcome back to the conclusion of our show with our guest today, Dr. Shelby Kegler, PhD. And Dr. Shelby, you have published a book. Can
Yes,
you tell
I
us
have.
a bit of information about that?
Well, I published a book called, the title is Underdog to Top Dog, An Improbable Rise. The book is for anyone who finds himself in an underdog situation, and it has instructions on how you overcome an underdog situation. The first part is an autobiography. It kind of describes how I defied the odds to come out of poverty, growing up with a single parent, never knowing my father, not having him in my life, and overcoming that. But at the second part of the book, I have chapters where I have 5 anchors, or 5 things that you can anchor yourself around to overcome the underdog situation, where it's the loss of a job, a divorce, anything that's a setback, or where you walk in, you find yourself an underdog, how you overcome that situation. And there are 5 principles in the book that you can use, and it has scales to rate yourself and on those 5 principles to see where you would stand.
Okay, now where can we get that book at?
You can get the book at through Amazon or IBJ.com, IndianapolisBusinessJournal.com.
Okay, and that information will be on the screen. And we just want to thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you once again, Doctor.
Yeah, thank you.
And we look forward to talking with you again in the very near future.
Thank you.
All right. Stay tuned for our next shows. God bless each and every last one of you. Take good care.
The National Federation of the Blind, Newsline, Indiana. For more information, go to nfb-in.org or call 855-963-6476. That's 855-963-6476. The National Federation of the Blind encourages you to live the life you want.